My mother, Harriet Reed to the world at large, was a woman of few words. In our family, that was rare. We had a lot of talkers, but my mother was a listener. And so she would sit back and let everybody else tell their stories and talk and would not say much. And like a lot of people who are careful with their words, that gave her a lot of power when she finally did speak. People knew that she wasn't a big talker, but when she did speak, they listened and paid attention. And she understood that. She was very smart and very observant, and she would kind of sit back and listen to everybody else, and then at some point, maybe later, she would sort of sum up what she had heard. And I can remember we would go to family outings or family get-togethers, and on the way back from that, one of us would say, "Boy, did you hear about Cousin X's new job?" And she'd say, "Cousin X is always trying to impress somebody." And that was all she would say. She had an ability to sort of sum people up in a single phrase, and it wasn't always the kindest summing up. I had an aunt who told a long story at one of these get-togethers about all her medical issues. And my mother's summation on the way home was, "Aunt Y loves to make everything as dramatic as possible." And that was her summation of Aunt Y. Those were very interesting things to hear from her. But you also got a little scared because you knew that in her mind she was summing you up in some way. And later in my life, I began to hear her summation of me, which was, "Mike never grew up." I didn't like that when I first heard it. I grew to like it a little bit better later. But that was sort of the way she was. So as time went on, my mom ended up living the last 6 years of her life in a nursing home near where I live in Carlisle. And so I would often go over to the nursing home to see her. And she didn't talk much then either. And ironically, as her physical condition deteriorated, one of the problems she had was that she was unable to speak very much. She developed some kind of condition with her throat or her vocal cords where she could barely whisper. So she said almost nothing at all. But she was really able to communicate with her eyes and her facial expressions. So if I was sitting there and some nurse that she didn't particularly like came in to treat her, I would get the roll of the eyes or the raised eyebrows, and I knew immediately what she was thinking. So that's sort of how we communicated over the last few years of her life. We got her a whiteboard with markers. She hardly ever used it. So one thing I really enjoyed doing with her, and she really enjoyed, we both loved basketball. So I would go over to the nursing home on Saturdays and watch a college basketball game with her during the basketball season in the winter. And we did that just about every Saturday. So one Saturday I showed up at the nursing home, went to her room, and she wasn't there. So I found a nurse and I said, "Do you know where my mom is?" And she said, "Oh, Harriet's in the sunroom playing bingo." I thought, well, that's odd because my mom never played much bingo, and it wasn't really a thing that she enjoyed usually, but that's good. Maybe she's socializing more. I'll go check this out. So I went down to the recreation room, and several of the residents were sitting in there with their wheelchairs and their bingo cards in front of them. And my mom was in there at a table, and she had 2 bingo cards in front of her and several tiles already in place that she had matched the number and letter that was drawn. So I said, "Mom, do you want me to help you with the bingo?" And she vigorously nodded. And I sat down and started to follow along as they called out the numbers. One problem was that several people in the room had some version or another of dementia, and they weren't really able to play bingo the way you should play it. So in particular, there was this one lady, Betty, and after every number and letter that was called out, Betty would yell, bingo! And they would go check Betty's card. She did not have bingo. And then we would wait a while and we would resume. Then there was another gentleman who he would just start calling out the numbers on his card before they drew anything, and that held things up. So after that went on for quite a while, I could see the frustration building in my mom's face because she didn't suffer fools gladly, and she was a kind of a stickler for playing by the rules when you played a game. So at one point after Betty got another bingo, and they were tending to that, I said, Mom, do you want to keep playing? And she just looked at me, took the 2 cards, held them up, and let all the tiles fall onto the table. And we went back to her room and enjoyed watching a basketball game together.